Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Ville Räisänen. So first, I want to thank you for the organizers to give me a chance to talk here. A little bit about my background. I have a Master of Arts in philosophy, and in my master thesis, I had these same themes that I wrote about. But I also have a background in Buddhist meditation. So I've been seriously practicing over 20 years now. So this is kind of like my viewpoint for this matter. So I'm going to talk about eco-dissolution and Buddhist insight of non-self. And here's the structure. So first I'm going to talk a little about eco-dissolution, then about Buddhism and Buddhist view of self, then about the Buddhist insight of non-self and conclusions. So I'm going to talk about more Buddhism than psychedelics, so sorry about that. But here we go. Eco-dissolution can be seen as a positive or negative experience. So it can be observed, for example, in acute psychosis and also in spiritual, mystical type experiences. So historically, positive eco-dissolution has been seen as an important feature of religious or spiritual experience. This comes from William James. I found this kind of simple possible definition of what the eco-dissolution would mean. And it's this full or partial cessation of the sense of self. There is some empirical evidence that the psychedelic catalyzed eco-dissolution can be a key factor in reduction of anxiety and depression. There is also some historical stuff, like Stanislav Grof has argued that the most effective mode of psychedelic therapy actually aims at eco-dissolution. But there is also some empirical evidence that eco-dissolution may not be a common feature of psychedelic experience. So it may be an uncommon to psychedelic users to actually have the eco-dissolution. So here is one example of eco-dissolution. You probably all know this author and the book, How to Change Your Mind. So in this book, Pollan talks about his psilocybin trip. And he says that now I watch as that familiar self began to fall apart before my eyes, gradually at first and then all at once. No more ego, that was okay. In fact, the most natural thing in the world. But who was this I that was able to take in the scene of its own dissolution? Good question. It wasn't me exactly. Here the limits of language become a problem. For what was observing the scene was a vantage and mode of awareness entirely distinct from my accustomed self. In fact, I hesitate to use the I to denote the presiding awareness. It was so different from my usual first person. So there was life after the death of ego. This was big news. Yet 24 hours later, my old ego was back in uniform and on patrol, temporarily freed from the tyranny of ego with its maddeningly reflexive reactions and its spin's conceptions of one's self-interest. We get to experience something a chemical can sustain a few hours. So I would argue that, of course, there are exceptions and anything can happen, but usually eco-dissolution under psychedelics is a temporary experience of full or partial cessation of the sense of self. So that's about the eco-dissolution. Then psychedelics and Buddhism. There is some connections between psychedelics and Buddhism. And there are, for example, phenomenological similarities between psychedelic experiences and experiences Buddhist meditators describe. And this is especially case in the self-consciousness or the sense of self. There is also some evidence that there is same neurological mechanisms behind both these experiences. However, as I be reading psychedelic research, I think there may be some lack of understanding of Buddhism in psychedelic studies. Of course, there's wide variety of understanding of Buddhism also in psychedelic studies. But these are some claims that I have seen or heard psychedelic researchers say. For example, Buddhist claims that the self doesn't exist, or Buddhists want to attain totally selfless state. And also one is Buddhism is deterministic fatalism. So I'm going to go next very fast through some key points about Buddhism and challenge these claims. First of all, Buddhism is not a one thing. It has its own history. It was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, which most scholars think that he actually lived. But of course, there's no proof of that. So usually Buddhism is divided into three main phases. There's early Buddhism, Mahayana, which has these two main philosophical schools, which I will little talk about, Madhyamaka and Yogacara, and then there is Vajrayana or Tantric Buddhism. These years that I put here are approximate, so just to see the scale of this history. Buddhism is usually classified as a religion, but Buddhism doesn't have creator God, supernatural being, souls, eternal souls. So if we look at Buddhism from the viewpoint of, let's say, Christianity, it seems like it is an atheist religion. So if there is no God or souls, then what Buddhism is about? My claim is that the aim of all Buddhist practice and philosophy, the most important teachings of Buddhism, is its practical soteriology, which means liberation from psychological suffering or unsatisfactoriness of life, usually dukkha in Pali language, and finding lasting happiness or contentment in life. And this soteriology is achieved through cultivation of wisdom, meditation, and morality. So wisdom in Buddhism maybe, or knowing in Buddhism may be different than we are used to. So there is these three levels of knowing. And the first level is wisdom that is heard or read. This is kind of easy to get. So then there is wisdom that is developed by own thinking. This is seen as higher form of understanding than only hearing or reading. Then there is this highest form of understanding that is wisdom that is understood with heart and whole being. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Sanskrit word, but Skilton argues that literally it means cause to become. And why this is so is because of the practical soteriology. It doesn't help you to read or think about the suffering. You have to actually feel it go away or feel it diminish. So, in Buddhism, only reading, doctrine, or reasoning is not enough, because the wisdom has to become permeated in feeling and perceiving. That's why one needs meditation. Then there is, in this meditation practice, there are stages of progress. My perspective is from the Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism, so I just simply go very fast through these maps because these are not so interesting, but I want to make a point. So usually the stages of progress in meditation have 5 paths and 10 bhumis. So there's path of accumulation, joining, seeing or insight, meditation, no more learning. Then there is bhumi models, which means kind of like achievements in the meditation practice. So there are then 10 bhumis in Mahayana, and these correspond to the 5 paths. The first two paths has no bhumis. First bhumi is achieved in the path of seeing or insight. Then there is the following 9 bhumis, which is the path of meditation, and then there is end of progress, according to Mahayana. And then there is Vajrayana, which says that, well, there is 3 bhumis more. And this is the path of no more learning. And this is then seen as the end of progress and Buddhahood. Why I went through this is that in Buddhism, there is no one experience or one insight that is all there is. There are always stages in Buddhist meditation. This is also true in early Buddhism or Theravada. They have different models, but it's always like this. So what about the self? In early Buddhism, there is this idea or teaching of 5 aggregates that is seen to compose a person. So there's body, feelings, perception, volitions, and consciousness. And the point is that the self isn't anything outside these aggregates, or also not any one of these aggregates. So intellectually understanding these aggregates, if you take it seriously, may already shake up belief to this kind of essential or permanent self. But for the meditator, the purpose of these aggregates is to have a framework to experientially investigate the physical and mental life. And from this investigation comes both cognitive and affective insight of unfindability of the self. So if we want to have some kind of definition what the self is in the early Buddhism, if we see this early Buddhist model, so we can say that it seems like that from the viewpoint of subjective experience in this present moment, it can be said to be some kind of psychophysical process that has no essence. The essence is unfindable. And this insight is said to happen in the path of seeing or insight, which is the first bhumi. So, why does Buddhist practice continue after the insight of non-self? After you have seen it, that you cannot find it. One way to look at this is through concept of karma. Usually karma, like in common speak or common language, it's usually seen as some kind of cosmic law, destiny, or as a general causation. But in Buddhism, karma, which comes from the word action, means psychological causation. It is not a general causation. And karma can be accumulated only through intentional actions. So this, like, to give some example of this, if I walk in the street and accidentally step on a bug or insect, this will not give me karma. But instead, if I think that, oh, I want to kill this insect, it's ugly, and then I enjoy this act, then it can be said that, okay, this creates karma. And there are wholesome and unwholesome, mixed karma, and this is always fruition of intentional actions. And the teaching or the point is that when you are liberated or seen as a Buddha, you do not accumulate karma anymore. So, if there is this accumulated karma, so where does it reside if there is no permanent self to be found? And this led the, I'll first go, there is this early Buddhist ideas of sense fields and corresponding consciousness between these, with these 6 sense fields. Of course, today we know that there are much more senses and science has developed much better categories. But the point I want to make here is that in Yogacara, like a couple of 100 years after the early Buddhism, they they categorize two consciousness more. There is afflicted consciousness and storehouse consciousness. And this afflicted consciousness is seen as the one which upholds the view, the kind of like wrong view of the essence of self. And storehouse consciousness is the basis of all ignorance that makes us suffer. It is also the basis of afflicted consciousness. So when we put these two ideas together, we can see that karma resides in the storehouse consciousness as some kind of seeds that color all our experience. So, like William Waldron has argued in his many texts, which are great, that there is actually this idea of Buddhist unconscious, and it is the recognition of unconscious mind. There is like an idea of differentiation between unconscious mental process from conscious awareness. So, if we see this from the light of practical soteriology, then it means that all conscious and so-called unconscious, negative or destructive moods, feelings, thoughts are these that should be liberated. And what liberation means is that when they are liberated, they do not arise. And this liberation happens through insight and then meditation practice. So, conclusions. Although there are phenomenological and neurological similarities, or maybe there are, with ego dissolution and Buddhist meditative experiences, I think it is possible to differentiate between temporal experience of ego dissolution and permanent insight of non-self. And I also claim that Buddhism does not claim that the self doesn't exist, or the aim is not to attain some kind of totally selfless state, maybe temporal state. And Buddhism is definitely not deterministic fatalism. What Buddhism may offer, this is of course speculation, but it may offer a practical framework where these ego dissolution experiences could be understood through one model. And my claim is that this model aims towards psychological well-being. So here's my references, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you a lot, Ville. Lots of time for questions and comments, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like your opinion on using psychedelics as a skillful means to understand all this theory through a personal experience, since in many Buddhist views, it would be unskillful to use something that is intoxicant.
Yeah, I think we have mixed opinions about that. So there are some teachers who are sympathetic to the ideas. Like if we see like contemporary Buddhist teachers who are like famous or known. So there is mixed opinions. Some of them actually say that it could be seen as a skillful means. Some of them are pretty negative about it. I'm in the positive camp, so I think that they can be skillful means. And there has been actually one psychedelic Buddhist conference where I was, and there was actually there were some people who were experimenting, like in practice. So they would have connected some substances and some practices and were trying in practice to see what they can do, what happens. So I think it's actually happening. Some people see that it's skillful means. But maybe it's not mainstream. So I think there is lots of pushback also.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I've been thinking about this interesting similarities and differences in Buddhism and Vedantic traditions like Advaita Vedanta and a little bit derivation from that, like Trika Saivism. And what seems to be different is how they frame if there is something essential, even though it's fully transcendent and not possible to describe in words in Vedantic traditions. But in Buddhism, as you said, there seems to be no essence or permanent essence. So the question is, what then is, in your opinion, what is Dharmakaya? And because I think in almost all Buddhist traditions, there's this concept of reincarnation. So what reincarnates if there is nothing that, if everything is non-permanent?
Yeah. I will go back to here. So my idea of this, my idea of Mahayana Buddhism is that there is actually two schools which concentrate on, I would say, different points. So the Madhyamika or middle way, I would see it as a deconstruction of metaphysics. So they quite forcibly argue that there is no essence to be found. But that claim is about metaphysics in general. But then there is this school of Yogacara, which the idea of the three bodies, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya, was born. So I think there are mixed views inside Buddhism that is the Dharmakaya actually essential or not. And then there is views in Tantric Buddhism that, which I find kind of weird, that there is this continuum of this Dharmakaya from one life to another. But they are always explaining that no, that is not the self. Because it is seen that it does not have any ominaisuuksia, like, yeah, it doesn't have any qualities at all. So I think this comes close to like Advaita Vedanta, if we see it as nirguna, without qualities. So I tend to gravitate more towards the Madhyamika idea of metaphysics. But this doesn't mean that the meditations that are invented or practiced in Yogacara and then in Tantric Buddhism, I think they are very effective, but you can take the idea of Dharmakaya, of nature of the mind, as more like technical idea. But I don't know.
My question is, in the insight of non-self, what exactly is denied about the self? So I understood from the first part of your talk that it is existence, but it is claimed that self doesn't exist. But it would seem to me that even Buddhists recognize that there is a sense of self, there is a feeling of self, and perhaps also that we think and behave as if we were someone, and also everyone else behaves this way. So in some sense, it seems to me that there is a self. So that's why I'm asking, what is denied about this self?
Well, I would again, coming back to Madhyamika or Mahayana Buddhism, there comes this idea of two truths, that there is ultimate truth and there is relative truth. So usually what Buddhists would argue that the ultimate self is unfindable. And the ultimate truth is that there is only conventional truth. So we can accept that the self exists, but it does not exist in the level of the ultimate truth. It is the insight. So it is an experiential insight that you can't find the self that you thought or think or felt that you are. And from there, you can make the distinction that, oh, there seems to be two truths. Because I'm not vanishing everywhere. I'm just working here in the world.
The Buddhists are accepting true contradiction.
Sorry?
You can continue on the break.
Sorry, I don't really have a question. I'm kind of joining this conversation about Dharmakaya. What is what is continuing possibly, and what is the self? Is it whatever? As I see it, I think the self that we are talking about now, there is two understandings: whether it's something essential, unchanging, eternal. That's one view, like soul in a lot of traditions, or yeah, I don't know about Western psychology, but and so then what Buddhists say, yes, you can have a sense of self, and that's the common mistake we take, that we think that we have some eternal like essence of Maya. My name is Maya, so that's like something that may continue after this lifetime. But Buddhism says no, there is no such a thing. There's a stream of consciousness that may continue, which would be then the Dharmakaya. It's the finest. There are different levels of consciousness, and it's the finest stream of consciousness that will continue and can reincarnate. But it's not something unchangeable, or it doesn't have like the Maya soul quality in it. Yeah.
Let's take one very brief one, the final one.
Well, I try to be brief. I agree that the current framing of ego dissolution in psychedelic science is a gross oversimplification, and we're working on fixing that in our lab in Leiden, actually. But from my own understanding, I feel like that maybe still it can provide a little glimpse into a state that you would otherwise only access after years of cultivating a skill through meditation. So even though it is temporary, it does seem like, due to the big overlap, it can give people a little idea of where the path of meditation is heading. Like, would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think that's like, if you see this from the Buddhist viewpoint, I think that's actually the main thing, that this is actually a good, skillful means to get a direct access to the experience. Yeah.
We have exactly 60 seconds, so I will pose one final question, which is about psychedelics, because this is also a psychedelics conference. So if it is true that some kind of insight into a non-self or something similar is what leads to the cessation of suffering in both psychedelic clinical trials and in enlightenment experience. So in 30 seconds, why is that so?
Why?
Why does it, how does it lead to the cessation of suffering? Why?
20 seconds.
I don't know.
Okay, answer accepted. I'm sorry for pressing you. I just try to bring it back to psychedelics.
Yeah.
Let's thank Ville once again. Let's continue.